Hi, you are watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. This is Zoph with my special guest co-host, Jalecia at Northcliffe, who has been a guest host with me before. It's so wonderful to have you back, Jalecia. Thank you.
Oh, it's wonderful to be here. Thanks for having me.
So for those who don't know the show, Simply Skating No Title Required is a show that focuses on the non-peers, non-landed baron and baronesses, or even court baron and baronesses in the SCA, because we think that everybody should have a voice and everybody has amazing things to talk about. And so we have guests on who are just regular folks like you and me, no peerages allowed. Except for me, I can't lie. People have called me out on that. I am a laurel, but we ignore that. The laurel wreath is left at the door. So tonight we have a very special guest who is a dear friend of mine, actually, Tomas Wormwood. And I've got to pull out your bio. So instead of doing that, because I don't have it, Thomas, tell us about yourself.
Well, I've been in the SCA since roughly 2002. Joined after going to my first Panzik. Been involved in a number of different things, minister of the list, acted, directed, produced, now running the Known World Players theater troupe, and recently been getting more and more involved with the Guild of St. Barbara, the cannoneers who usually are just seen at Panzik, but we're out there where we can be.
Okay, so how did you find the SCA?
I found the SCA through Renaissance Fair activities. I was on the cast of the New Jersey Renaissance Festival and Kingdom for 10 years, and a number of the people there are also SCAdians and Panzik attenders. And I kept hearing about Panzik and these stories of what goes on there and different things that people got involved with, outside of Panzik, but never really had the time myself to go with all the time I was putting into the Ren Fair. And then one year I had a physical injury, which pretty much knocked me out of doing stage combat safely. So I took that year off of the Ren Fair, but kind of needed my medieval fix. So I finally let some friends talk me into joining them at Panzik, and met a woman there who, 6 months later became my fiance. And that was kind of it. I was in.
That's amazing. Well, of course, we know each other from Known World Players, which is the theater troupe at Panzik. Can you talk a little bit about how you got into that, and maybe start off with what it is? Because I think a lot of people don't even know that we're there.
Yes, the Known World Players is a theater troupe which operates mostly at Panzik simply because of the scale of what we do. It was originally started these many, many years ago by our own Zoph. Mm-hmm. And I got involved my second or third year at Panzik, I think it was, with another troupe called Masquerade Medieval, started by Master Lorcan. And at a certain point, Zoph decided she wanted to step down from Known World Players and was going to close the troupe. And Lorcan wasn't going to let that happen because it was just too big a thing. So he basically merged his troupe into hers, took over and ran with it. And, after a while, kind of voluntold me to take over. And so that's where I've been for a number of years now.
Yeah. So how did you get involved with Masquerade Medieval?
I saw, I think it was a advertisement in the Panzik Independent, the newspaper that is published at Panzik every year for auditions. And I've done a little bit of acting before. I was in a play in high school, another play in college, and then of course, 10 years on the Ren Fair. So I got that, kind of, I like to do the acting thing. And so I, asked some questions about it, went and auditioned, got a part in the play. And it was a weird one because we actually had a delay there due to, and I actually, at this point, I don't remember why, but the whole show was pushed off for a year. So we auditioned 1 year, didn't show, and then showed the year after. So it was like a 2-year production cycle basically for that show. And I just kind of, I got the bug again. I was hooked. That like being on stage, hearing the audience reactions to stuff when you say a line or you deliver something in a stage combat and you get that audience reaction, ooh, or yay, and cheers, applause, laughter, crying, whatever, whatever you're going for. When you get that reaction from the audience, it's a feedback that you can't ignore.
Yeah, yeah. What's been your favorite role, either on stage or off? Because you're so talented either way. You do so many
Oh,
different.
that's a tough question. There's been a couple of different things. When I was with the Ren Fair, I basically played one character for about 8 years that I was there, and then that character was written out of the show to be, and it wasn't that something was wrong. They needed a big, specific splash, and it gave me the option, hey, would you like your character to be this? But it meant the end of my character. And I kind of said, okay, yeah, it's a center stage moment that I couldn't turn down. So there were a lot of great moments from that character, but there was some side shows that happened, throughout the years. And one year I played a pirate character in our living chess match.
Hmm.
And that character actually was the inspiration for the name that I go by in the SCA, Wormwood. I actually played two different pirates, strangely. One show I played Driftwood, who was the ship's carpenter for a beached pirate ship. So obviously he wasn't very good at his job. And the other character I played was Wormwood, who was this dog nuts, pirate slasher, fighting guy in the chess match. We had a third brother, Deadwood, but nobody knows what happened to him.
But boom.
Yeah, but So when I signed up for my first Panzik, I was talking with my friend on the phone as I was signing up, and I said, it's asking me for SCAdian name. What should I do? It's, oh, dude, you got to put in Wormwood. So that's he's probably one of my favorite. He's just a fighter. That's really all he did was stage combat in the show, and it was a short scene, but it's just a characterization I had a lot of fun with. On stage in formal plays, yeah, I think actually the character of John I played in Lion in Winter was probably of those a favorite one. And it wasn't so much the role itself, but it was something I got from an audience member after the show was done at Panzik. He came up and told me that I had really sold the character of a whiny little spoiled brat kid, which meant a lot to me, because while that's not exactly something you want to associate with yourself, here I was a 30 something, older individual, and I successfully pulled off a whiny teenager, to a live audience. So that really kind of locked that character in as a favorite.
Mm.
Now you are also, I do want to talk more about theater, but I also want to veer off into talking about service, because that's what you're mostly known for, is the service that you do. I know you because of the service that you do at Pensick with helping the performing arts tent, you and your lovely wife, who, hi Marianne, you're awesome. Um, Tell me how you got, what did it for you with service?
Um, it started with I went to Panzik. I met this woman that I became very interested in. I wanted to be part of what she did. And she was a fencer, and a mutual friend who's actually, we kind of blame him as being responsible for us meeting. He described her to me, after Panzik, when I started asking him some questions about her, as a woman who was fairly new to fencing, but kicking ass and taking names. So it's like, okay, so I want to be part of this. I discovered fairly early on that I've got, at the time anyway, and I haven't tried in a long time, but I should go back and try again. I had a problem with my wrist where I couldn't hold a saber or an epee for the length of time necessary for a bout to really go on. So I needed to be involved. So I found out about the Minister of Lists. These are the men and women who run the tournaments for all the fighters, both the rattan and the rapier fighters. They organize all the tournament trees or the bear pits or the round robins or whatever format the marshals want to run. They're the folks that keep the paperwork going. They're the ones who file all the authorization paperwork. And I said, that sounds like something I could get involved in. So I started helping out at local events, eventually became a warranted MOL and became the MOL for my shire for a number of years. And that just kind of has been the thing. It's a way for me to be involved when I don't necessarily have the skills to do the fighting, or I don't have the artistic bent to work on, weaving or woodworking or carving or, learning blacksmithing, all that kind of, it's a way for me to be involved, be around people and help out.
I do want to mention for our audience that folks not in the East Kingdom, that in the East Kingdom at least, maybe Atlantia, I don't know, the minister of the list is a warranted officer position that most groups have. Versus in the mid realm, we just sort of grab people who are good at running lists. It's not an official position for people, which was a shock for me because I was MOL when I lived out in Delaware and Care Adamant and moved to the mid realm. And I'm like, I love being an MOL. And they were like, a what? And I was like, oh man. So anyway, is it your turn, Jalicia?
No, you go ahead. I'll jump in after the next question.
So what are you still running lists now?
I actually just recently we had the crown tourney for the East Kingdom was in our shire, so I went and I helped there. I didn't, obviously being crown tourney, the Kingdom MOL ran that, but I was a list runner for that and helped out in that regard.
Yeah. And it says that you're a siege marshal in training. What's a siege marshal?
Well, yeah, that's kind of a at this point, it's probably a dead issue. But siege weapons are used in heavy combat. That's the trebuchets and the ballista that shoot those wonderful long foam darts or little clusters of tennis balls. And there's a separate set of rules about how the engines have to be constructed. They have to be checked. The ammunition has to be checked. So just like there's marshals for rattan and marshals for rapier, there are marshals specific for siege. And after I'd been in the SCA for several years, I found out about siege weapons and got involved. The local shire had a couple of siege engines in their inventory that we used at demos, including a really large one that the throwing arm on that thing was like 25, 30 feet long. It was a literal tree trunk. And I just love the mechanics of a trebuchet. So I wanted to try to get more involved in that. And it was a difficult path for me because siege does not happen at a lot of events because it takes up room. You need a larger field for that to happen. And there's a lot of fighters who aren't really happy with siege. They're not happy with combat archery either, because they're sitting there, all their skill in defending against, whoever's in front of them. And all of a sudden a random thing can come out of the sky they can't even see and take them out of combat. So there's, a lot of pushback, I think, or at least at the time there was, that, a lot of events didn't want to have siege at it. So it was hard to get into events to practice, learning all the rules, practice doing inspections on equipment and ammo. And there's also a requirement to actually serve as crew on a siege engine in an event, in several battles to become a siege marshal. Basically, you can't just run the rules. You got to live them from the inside. I didn't have the equipment to be able to do that. You got to be minimal armor for a heavy fighter. And I didn't have the gear. So that kind of slowed and stopped that after a while.
Oh, are you going to keep trying to pursue it though, or are you just going to go in another path?
I think so. I like many people who have the helium ham problem. Yes. I get involved in too many things, and there's only so much time. So I've kind of put siege marshal to the side. Once I've finished my run with the known world players, I may try to see if I can pick that back up again. Try to find out what's going on locally, get out to more local events for that, and see what happens.
We are never letting you leave known world players. So.
Oh, I'll always be around. I just don't want to always be in charge.
I can relate. So what is an average as somebody running the troop now? It's very different from when I ran it because it was just me and my friend, and that was it. I always told people our budget is whatever was in my checking account that I could spare before Panzik. So what for you is an average Panzik like? When do you get there? What are your hours that you're putting in?
Well, it's as you said, I help put the performing arts tent together. The stage that is built there, for people who've been to Panzik and seen it, you kind of get a sense the stage is a really wonderful thing. But what you don't realize is that stage gets built by us when we get to Panzik. When Panzik starts, all this there is a big tent. There's chairs stacked up, folded and stacked in piles, and big empty space. There's a trailer that gets parked next to the tent, and everything comes out of there. We've got all these platforms that have to have legs attached. They've got to get flipped over, bolted together. That back wall gets screwed on, and the chairs all get little tags on them, so they're identified as being performing arts. And all of that work happens in the first couple of days of Panzik. My wife is the one who actually designed the current platforms that are the stage. I'm the one who did the bulk of the construction for that. We did that for a week prior to Panzik 5 or 6 years ago now. And so we're just the best crew to put it together because we know it intimately. We, literally every bolt and screw in there, we're involved with. So my Panzik starts with putting my own camp together and then spending Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of Peace Week, putting the stage together, and everything needs to be done inside the performing arts tent. I then get a couple of days off, and the No World Players show starts Saturday evening of the middle weekend. We have a cast meet and greet. Everybody gets together for the first time face to face as a cast, have a read through of the script, and then rehearsals start. When I have to put on the hat as production manager, which thankfully I have a crew that rotates through, so I don't have to do this as much now. It's, every day early in the morning, got to get up and open up the performing arts tent so that the actors can get in and start running their rehearsals. But it's putting together what you would go to see in a community theater. They spend 4 to 8 weeks rehearsing, generally, either, 4 to 6 hours a day, or if it's a more formal production, they might be full-time rehearsing for that 4 to 6 to 8 weeks before the show goes on. We do that in 6 days. Face to face. So, all the blocking that happens, all that's right there. So it's just an insane amount of focus that the director and the actors have to go through. So the production manager and myself supporting the production manager have to try to make sure all the physical environment around them is ready to go so they don't have to think about it. They don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Boy, you're really making me miss it now.
I know. I know.
It's been nice and terrible.
Yeah.
The pandemic. It's been nice because for once, I haven't had that, stress of having to worry about things, making sure everything's in the right place for everybody else to be able to have their fun. But it's bad because I haven't been there to see everybody having their fun.
Yeah, yeah. Well, my memory of you is that you go at some point, you're under the stage. You're like on your back, crawling underneath there and putting in the bolts and everything. And then also, aren't you climbing up the poles to fix the lights?
Yeah. Well, I don't climb the poles. We have a nice sized ladder for that.
Well, still though, you're up there.
Yeah, I'm backstage crew, and which is strange because prior to getting involved with the No More Players, I've never done backstage stuff. I was always just an actor. Not
I
that
had
an
no
actor
idea.
is just anything. Yeah, it's all my backstage experience has been KWP.
Wow, I didn't know that either. Yeah, and I guess we should tell people that we cast it 1 year, and then we work on it during the off time, and then we put it up.
Yes, there is that. The show cycle is a good year and a couple of months. So the auditions are at Panzik, casting is done during September, October, scripts are sent out around about December, and then telephone rehearsals are now Zoom and Google Meet rehearsals start usually in late March, early April kind of thing. So there's a lot of work that goes on before we get face to face, but having now been in both physical productions and now virtual productions, for those of you that maybe saw our virtual production of 12th Night recently, there's a difference in acting with somebody on the phone or on a computer screen versus acting with them face to face. There's a whole different chemistry that happens, and it doesn't happen, for the most part, it doesn't happen naturally. It has to be, you have to work with it. You have to get that comfort level between yourself and your fellow actors. You've got to know where you are on stage so that, your emotions can come through properly. And you can't just memorize your lines and then jump on stage and do the show and have it look good.
Right, right. Now you're also into stage fighting. Can you talk a little bit about what makes a stage fight look convincing and what makes it not look convincing?
A lot of it is that it's a partnership, and probably one of the best ways to describe it is a good stage combat routine, good fight choreography is a dance. It's not in a real fight. somebody swings a sword or throws a punch and hits the other person, and that other person is physically pushed by that, or they block it and there's a shock of that contact through that happens. In stage combat, you obviously don't want to really be hitting somebody. So what has to happen is, the person who's attacking has to swing the sword to come in at a certain place, and the defender has to know in his head that it's coming, but not react to it until an appropriate time. So, if I start swinging here and all of a sudden the guy defending puts up his block before I've even gotten there, it's going to look bad. There's a fluidity to the motion that has to happen so that your physical reaction looks natural, even though it has to be exaggerated for it to be seen. Almost any real fight that you see on stage anyway, if you actually took that fight and put it out on the list field and have them fight it, it should look good, but real fighters are going to go, well, that move would never work. And that's true, because we're trying to make things visible and able to be followed by the audience. If we fought on stage at the speed rapier fighters fight, nobody in the audience would understand what's going on until somebody was lying on the floor, because it's just, real fights are just too fast. So you have to learn how to slow your shots down, how to exaggerate the moves without over exaggerating it. And that also depends on the style. I mean, you do a comedy kind of thing, and some things might get overly exaggerated because it's funny to be overly exaggerated.
Mhm.
Okay,
So I hope that
time.
answered the question.
It did. All right, so here's my question. Of all the fight scenes in movies,
Oh, good one. Yeah.
what's your favorite fight scene in a movie?
There's two, and they're two different types of fights, which is why I can probably get away with saying that. There's a wonderful, and I think it's probably classified as a B movie, called They Live, starred Rowdy Piper. And there is this brawl between him and another guy in about midway through the film that is just one of the most drawn out hand-to-hand fights. I mean, the only weapon that ever shows up into it is a 2x4 at one point for a brief period. And it's just this, it's a mix of, WWF fighting moves and just straight on punches. And it's not martial artists doing fancy kicks and, all sorts of stuff like you see on The Matrix. It's just two guys slugging it out mano a mano. And some of it really happened. There's at one point you can see on the back of Keith David, I think was the other actor. He's a large African-American, bald. And at one point you can see the back of his head showing a pink spot where Roddy had been pounding his head into the pavement and got a little too abrupt with it. Yeah, so that's just a fantastic fun film to watch, fight scene to watch. I would love to be able to do a fight scene like that on film someday. The other one is a portion of the fight between Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader in Return of the Jedi, because it just shows some incredible fencing footwork, and just the cinematography of it is just so wonderful, and it's totally fanciful. And again, like I mentioned, other stage fight, probably most of it would never work in a real fight, but it looks gorgeous and it looks real. And it's this one section, they're moving from right to left across the screen. They're actually kind of in the background. There's stairs and some control consoles or something like that in front of them. And they're just going across. And Mark Hamill has got this great footwork where he's got one leg forward and he's kicking and moving and he's never crossing his legs. And it's just, the whole thing is just a beautiful flow. And it really shows the skill of the fight choreographer, Bob Anderson, I think it was, who put all that together, and the amount of training they had to go through to get that level of fluidity. That's just this one long take, and it's just perfect.
I know what I'm watching this weekend.
Yeah, I want to watch. Yeah.
Oh, wait, Jaleesa, it's your turn. Sorry.
Well, this is kind of a silly one. What about the bar fight in Trouble with Tribbles?
Yeah, no, that is a great fight, but that whole show, and I love, I'm a Star Trek fan, have been since I was a little kid. I eschew the term Trekkie because that tends to be the more just geeky fanboy types. I prefer the term Trekker. I like to think about the science and the philosophy, and get into the intellectualism of the show, but it's just pure brain candy for me to watch any original series episode. But fight choreography had not advanced to the levels it did by the 80s and the 90s. So the fight scenes there are really cheesy, but they're fun cheesy. And
But
the
they're
whole
fun.
the whole Tribbles episode was fun cheesy. I mean, Chekhov going up against that one Klingon, bam, 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 and nothing happens. It's just like, whoop, there he goes. It made all the right decisions at the right times for things.
Yeah,
But
I mean, it looks chaotic, which it needs to be. But I love that Cyrano Jones has his drink and is able to go through all the chaos, and then at the end, the guy takes it from him.
yeah, and then he pulls another one out of his pocket, and then he does this weird thing. He's holding the drink way up here, and he reaches up with his other hand to pick it up and pull it down. It's like that character was just so well done. It's distressing to me though to watch that, because today most syndication, that scene gets cut short at different points, and if you know it well enough, you can see where, wait a minute, what happened to this reaction? So I like to go back to DVD and watch an uncut version of it.
Yeah, all those episodes got sliced and diced in syndication, so they could put in more commercials and everything. But we don't want to turn this into a Trek podcast. That's another podcast.
Okay, yeah, let's do another podcast. So how does one get into doing stage choreography? How does that become a choice for a person?
For me, it was getting involved with the Ren Fair I got into, and it was really a weird happenstance. I went to this Ren Fair with a friend of mine that I knew from college days, and we had done a couple of the regional Ren Fairs, just as one-off visits. And he was living in Jersey at the time, knew about this Ren Fair, and said, "Hey, let's go see this." They had extended their run by a weekend because they had a complete washout from rain. Central Jersey, June, rain happens. So I got to go on a weekend that wasn't originally supposed to happen. Saw this show, saw this incredible work that they did, and found out during the course of the day that all the actors there were volunteers. It was an all volunteer Ren Fair. Nobody was paid to be there. Vendors, of course, and I think the folks that ran the food court, those were paid vendors, but they were collecting money too. So it's they were kind of a wash in that regard. But all the actors, all the staff that ran the games booths and things like that, the ticket booth, all that was volunteer, and all their rehearsal stuff and everything was done on weekends. So just like KWP, it's a much longer production cycle than what would normally be considered for a show that was going to run for 5 weekends. And so I showed up, auditioned, got a part, and they taught stage combat to the actors as they went. It was all kind of learn as you go. And I just loved it. I've always liked fantasy films and sci-fi films, and, watching sword fights and things like that over the years. I mean, Highlander, of course, is a favorite film, from back in the day. So that opportunity to suddenly have a weapon put in my hands and be shown how to do a fight that looked good to the audience was just something I fell in love with and learned as I went.
Yeah. What kind of things do you do to make sure that the actors are safe while they're fighting?
Rehearse. It's as a fight choreographer, when I've choreographed a couple of shows over the years, including some things with KWP, it's if it isn't something you do all the time, it's very difficult to learn how to do safely quickly. So there's always learning how to stage the fight. What is it that the director needs? Do you need this person to look like they've been beaten to within an inch of their life, but then manage to recover and get that one lucky shot in? Or you're trying to sell up, how virtuous this guy is, so he's just defending and only, striking that one blow that he needs to end the fight. That kind of informs what type of end result you need, and you just build moves to get to that. A lot of it goes into looking at the positions of the actors. Okay, this person throws a right cross. Well, what does that do to him? Well, if the other guy ducks and he misses, well, now he's out of position. The other guy has a wide open shot to his cheek. So you kind of work on that, but you start with everybody separated, so there's no chance of actually impacting on each other. and you start slow. And as moves get smoother and muscle memory starts taking over and they can remember a sequence of events, you then start moving a little faster and a little closer together. And you just kind of build layer by layer, and always make sure your weapons are not edged. They have edges, but they're not sharp. You could go like this on a piece of paper and the paper is just going to fold away from it.
So have you done any looking into period stage combat? I mean, we know that Shakespeare's plays were staged with with fight choreography. I mean, they were not
It is
really
something
fighting.
it is something I have thought about, but part of the problem is I don't have a good handle myself on how to start research. So it's kind of one of those, it's something I want to do, but I know it's going to take time. So I want to make sure I have enough time to put into it to then go to somebody and say, hey, I need to research this. Where do I start? What library do I go to? Where do I start trying to find translations or copies of things? Part of me has not wanted to go that route, though, because I know the evolution of stage combat over the last 100 years, even, and what has gone into things and what I've been taught, as how to keep things safe. And I'm a little afraid to go try to open up that Pandora's box of what did they do, only to find out that, okay, what they did is not anything we could do today because it's just not safe. And especially back then, actors, that was their lives. That's all they did was this acting thing, so they could spend 8, 10, 12 hours a day learning moves, rehearsing fights, if that's what they did, and a lot of it may very well have been, well, they were actually just doing real fights. They just were told, okay, you're going to stab him in the gut, just aim 6 inches that way, instead of right at him, so they may have just been doing, real moves that were in the fencing treatises that the masters wrote. So
yeah, and
Right.
it could be a lot like the music where it just says there's music, and what specifically it was has been lost over time. They didn't
that may also be true.
Yeah.
Exeunt chased by a bear. So I mean, I'm just wondering about just the research part of it itself, not reenacting it. But you make a really valid point that it probably, yeah. What other thing? I mean, I want to talk about St. Barbara, right? St. Barbara.
Yep.
But I also want to talk about other arts. Are there other arts? You mentioned woodworking and blacksmithing as something that you're not doing, but what is another art that you've considered pursuing? Are there any?
One thing I have thought about trying to get into was bardic, but bardic in the storytelling mode. And I've seen a couple of performers at Panzik who go around, like, do shows at little camps. There's a woman who goes by the name the Pocket Bard. Who I haven't seen in a couple of years, so I don't know if she still plays or not.
She,
But I
yeah.
saw her do some wonderful performance at somebody's camp. And I kind of have an interest in wanting to do that because that, at its core really is just another type of acting. It's just a really, 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 really long monologue. But I kind of got myself into a loop where, well, I want to do that, but I don't have any skill in writing stories. So I wanted to try to find, okay, well, what are period stories that I could tell? And outside of the Canterbury Tales, I really didn't get a lot of ideas on what to look at for stories that you could tell by yourself, across the campfire to other people. And it just seemed most bardic types seem to be more interested in bardic music. So it kind of was one of those, I threw myself into the deep end of the pool to discover that there were no lifeguards around and I wasn't quite ready to be swimming yet. So it was
Well, yeah, it's a good thing you happen to know somebody who's a storyteller in the SCA.
Yes.
yes.
So we can talk. I mean, unless we want to do a show, which would be cool to do a bardic show of some simply SCAdian no title required bards and talk about bardic resources. But ping me offline and we'll talk. And I have resources for you.
Excellent.
Because I did that for me was I was tired of only performing every year with the nominal players, which I didn't even perform because I was directing. So I got into storytelling and I started by doing Shakespearean monologues and then branched out into finding stories and then started writing my own.
Yeah, and that is something that when I was pinging the Bardic community trying to find, where's a good way for me to get started, there were some mentions of, picking some Shakespeare monologues to do. And you both know my prior anyway attitude about Shakespeare, which maybe there's a crack in that armor. We'll see. We're not quite
You
there
were
yet.
great in 12th Night.
I
You
was,
were so
I was gonna bring
awesome.
it up. I was going to bring that up, but I didn't want to put you on the spot. But since you went there, please tell us your take on Shakespeare. Which I want to say, I mean, I think it's valid. Every opinion is valid. I think you have some good points, but please share it.
Yeah, this goes back many years. When I was in college, I mentioned before, I did one play in college. I took a couple of acting classes while I was in college prior to doing the play, and the one professor I had one year had us doing for I can't remember if it was the midterm or the final. No, I think it was the midterm. The final was a modern piece, but the midterm was working in pairs doing scenes from Shakespeare. And the scene my partner and I got assigned was from A Midsummer Night's Dream. I think it's Act 2, Scene 1. It's where Puck is first introduced. And there's this interaction between Puck and one of the Queen's fairies. And Puck has this, well, it's not a huge monologue, but for me, it was a longer monologue. And I understood maybe a third of it. I just, the Shakespearean language, I just didn't get. Yeah, I read Romeo and Juliet in high school. I don't think I did Hamlet then. So I didn't have a lot of experience in reading Shakespeare. So I went to my acting professor and I said, is there someplace I can go to look up what some of this means so I understand what it is I'm doing? And she said, no, go with what you've got right there. Oh. And, so I had, my midterm exam is based on me acting out something that I don't understand. And that, I got through it. I got a passing grade, but it left a very bad taste in my mouth for performing Shakespeare. And that's something that's been with me for years. And, KWP, obviously is known for doing Shakespeare. I was assistant director for Henry V, the fantastic show we did of that, 8, 9, 10 years ago now. And I've produced for Merchant of Venice and Merry Wives of Windsor. I can support it, but I'm not interested in being involved in it. And
until this summer,
Zoe reached out to me and said, "Hey, let's do a virtual production." I said, "Okay, let's do it." And she said, well, "I want to do 12th Night." I said, "Okay, you go with it." And she said, "Will you be in the cast?" And I went, "Oh." And it wasn't terrible. It was a smaller role, which works well for me because my memorization skills aren't the greatest. It took a little bit to get into and understand the character, but I was able to get through it. And, I now, I don't hate Shakespeare, but I don't love him either.
Right. Okay. So Marianne, your wife, Mare, has said, Rick, tell them about the accident at the Ren Fair.
Yeah, so that goes back to that safety thing. We had a particular show at the New Jersey Ren Fair that was called the Enchanted Forest. And basically the entire day had a storyline that ran from the opening ceremonies through the closing show that followed characters. And there was this consistent thing that happened through a number of different shows. And the Enchanted Forest was part of that, where there was always a quest, and different knights, usually from both the good side and the bad side of the conflict, would go on this quest with their squire and usually a man of arms and a pack of 10 or 15 or 20 audience members. And we had this path carved out through the woods that bordered the fair, and there would be little clearings where a scene would happen, and the whole thing was a continuous little storyline going from scene to scene to scene. And a couple of scenes would just be straight acting stuff, interaction with another cast member. Sometimes an audience member might get involved in, hey, can you hold on to this for me type of thing. But we'd have fight scenes scattered at a couple of different points too. One of the years I was going along with one of the knights as not his squire per se, but as his fighting companion. And there was a fight scene that would happen, and there was 2 or 3 bad guys and the 2 of us, and our man at arms would keep the crowd back and protected. And my fight partner and I were going through the sequence, and this was a fight scene. I want to say it was probably 20 or 25 moves long, which is really only like 30 or 40 seconds of fight, I think, when you get through it. But it's a long series to remember. And we got out of step with each other, and we realized that, okay, we're not in the same spot here. So we both kind of took a step back, reset, and went into the fight, but we went into the fight at 2 different points. So I was like on move 13, he was on move 10, something like that. And the move I was supposed to be doing was a thrust at him. And, the thrust is aimed here, but it's going to go off to the side, and he's going to have a block and knock it to a side. Well, his move was a step into me. And the way we did our fights, if you're attacking, you step forward. If you're defending, you step back. Well, all of a sudden, we both stepped at each other with an attack. Now, his attack was coming in wide to my shoulder, and I was armored, so that wasn't going to be a terrible problem. But my attack was a thrust towards his shoulder. With him stepping in meant now it was a thrust towards his face.
Oh.
And I saw it coming and realized, oh, this is not good. I pulled back on my arm as fast as I could, but I've already got momentum going forward. I'm on one leg, my other foot hadn't gone down yet, so I can't pull my whole body back. And because of the armor I was wearing, I couldn't go all the way back here. I went about this far, and then my armor locked up. I can't pull back further than that. And my sword hit him in the face.
Oh.
And it was a very bad experience. I immediately, I dropped my weapon. I'm jumping down on top of him, making sure he's okay. The other fight was ending, and they just moved everybody down, but I was a complete wreck. I pulled myself out of the rest of the day's show. I was an emotional wreck. I could not fight. Fortunately it was Sunday, so we didn't have a show on that Monday. I had the week to try to recover, talked with a couple of people who I was close with in the fair, and went back the next Saturday and got with a couple of my fight partners before the show opened. And we ran our sequences in slow motion, first without weapons, then with weapons in hand, to say, hey, can I still feel comfortable with, a big piece of metal in my hand that can wound, could, in a really bad situation, I could kill somebody with this thing, even though it's not sharp. And could I still feel comfortable and confident and do this safely? And thankfully, those 2 or 3 people, their trust in me let me get my confidence back, and I was able to go back into the fair and continue on with the run. The really crazy thing was the guy I hit, I had no idea how bad I hit him. I just knew that the sword had cut him right around his eye, and I didn't know how bad it was, because face cuts, they bleed like crazy, but they could be minor and still bleed like crazy. He comes in the next, that day wearing an eye patch, and he pulls out a jar that's got an eyeball floating in it. And he was loving this. All that, he didn't care at all that he now had a little scar under his eye. He was looking forward to having that scar. He was having so much fun pulling out his eye in front of people. Fortunately, he had sent word ahead. Somebody warned me that he was doing this, so I knew about it ahead of time. But it was rough, and it's always made me just that little more cautious about doing anything.
Yeah.
Making sure you've got those ranges, making sure you're safe and you're solid, and you know what you're doing.
So we have 15 minutes left. I want to take 5 minutes to talk about St. Barbara.
Guild of St. Barbara, the Boom Boom Clan, as I like to call it. It's the guild is black powder recreation. They deal with cannons, mortars, flintlocks, early period, firing pieces. They are well known for those who go to Panzik, the cannon sounds that open up the war, start and end the battles. That's all the Guild of St. Barbara manning the cannons up on top of Mount Iceland. I'm trying to remember what inspired me to go up and see what was going on one year. But I found out, it's just like anything else in the SCA. If you ask the right person, you'll get a ton of information.
Yes.
And you'll get invites to join. And the Guild of St. Barbara is just like any other group. They love people coming up to learn about things. They love to teach what's going on, and they love for people to be involved. And it's a careful thing. It's not, you can't just jump in and be involved, because black powder is dangerous. And yes, they only use small loads in this thing, but If you go to touch off a cannon and it doesn't go boom, that means you've got a load of black powder in that cannon that hasn't exploded. And there's not really many safe ways to get it out of there without risking, life and limb. But that's, I think that's a little bit of the draw for me. I've loved fireworks for years, and Pennsylvania recently opened up their laws that allow more, fun stuff for retail use. So I've gotten into doing a little fireworks expo every year for my local friends, and this was a way to look at it. Well, what was it like back then? And it's been a lot of fun. It's a very regimented thing. Things are done by the book, and it's all done for a reason in a very specific way. So it's kind of fun to get in and learn what it is you're seeing. If you watch like Master and Commander, the movie with Russell Crowe, you can kind of see a little bit of what happens when they show some of the scenes on the gun deck, but they don't, obviously it's a movie, they don't bother explaining what's going on. But then going to learn how to really crew a gun, you can see where they got some things right, where they maybe cut corners a little bit, for the sake of a movie.
Yeah. Who's cueing you guys up there that it's time to set off the cannon? Does someone run up and say now, or how do you know?
Yeah, it's the there's radios that are used between the lead marshals and the person, whoever's running the cannon line on any given event. So the marshals radio up, fire for opening, and then they'll call up and give us a warning, we're going to end it in 30 seconds or 20 seconds now. And that's when we touch off, from there. So it's modern technology to set off ancient sound effects.
All right. Well, one of my last questions wants to be about service. And you mentioned before that you have a bad case of helium hand, which I also do. And I'm wondering how you strike that balance. How do you know when you're too busy? And the thing of it is, people say, well, just say no, but I want to do it. I want to. So how do you say no when you want to do it, but you know that you really should not for whatever reason?
I'll let you know when I get the answer to that question.
All right.
A lot of it comes down to, for me, the things I've gotten myself involved in are such big time crunches. There's not a whole lot of opportunity for me to raise my hand for other things. So it's, when I'm at Panzik, my mornings are about, making sure KWP's got their issues taken care of. If there's something I need to extend outside of, like, somebody lost their copy of script, I gotta, somebody needs to run off site to get a new copy made. I make myself available for that. And, run with the Guild of St. Barbara. Those are often, half day or full day involvements of time because of how long the battles are set up to go for. So that kind of helps keep me from getting too overextended at Panzik, because you can only be in one place at a time. So it's hard to say, yes, I'll be there and I'll be over there at the same. It just doesn't work. Maybe if I have another accent with a sword and just no. A lot of it has to come down to what you're comfortable with. I've had a friend of mine, actually kind of complain to me sometimes because he's more of a night owl. So I'll go over to hang out with him at his camp in the evenings, and we'll be sitting around, a bunch of us sitting around the campfire, sitting around the awning of the tent, just chatting, nothing exciting. And I'll just kind of doze off in the chair. Why? Because I've been up since 6 a.m. and it's now 9 o'clock at night, and it's been a long, hot day. But I'm comfortable falling asleep in a group of my friends because I feel safe. And you guys go and have your conversation. I'll listen in and I'll doze off. But that's, for me, a lot of Panzik actually is a working vacation. I like to put to other people. I'm kind of there to make sure everybody else has fun, because that's, in a certain way, that's how I have fun.
Right.
But I carve out little slices of stuff for myself here and there.
Panzik isn't a vacation for me. I always take another vacation to get over the vacation that Panzik is in.
Right.
I should do that, but I'm never smart enough to do that.
I'll talk to Mayor. We'll make it happen. Okay, last question that we ask all of our guests.
Yep.
What can the SCA do better?
I think probably, and there's probably a whole list of things, and there's obviously many issues that have been coming up in the last couple of years that a lot of people are focused on. But I think one of the things that I'm seeing is kind of a problem is that we're getting to be an older and older society. It's the same people have been around for a long time and not a lot of new faces coming in.
Mm.
And I know when I started, I got pulled in from a very specific angle, but that's not, I don't think, a typical path. I would not normally recommend somebody go to Panzik as their first SCA event. It just, I got lucky that I had some experience under my belt from other camping type things that I kind of knew I was getting into, and I had some friends who were shepherding me in, so they kind of helped make sure I had the right intro into things. But people coming to local events or going to demos need to be drawn in, and I think we need to come up with what are better ways to engage people early in things they'd be interested in. I kind of think of things like the wine and paint experience things that are out there where, bunch of usually just women get together and they're given, here's all the painting supplies, you bring your wine, we sit around, we paint and we drink, and they have fun doing that. We need to come up with things like that that can draw in not just kids, because you can do little kits to make like little tabletop catapults and we throw a ping pong ball. And yeah, that's great to get kids engaged, but is that really going to draw them into wanting to be involved in siege combat? Not necessarily, because they're too young to get there. So we need that middle range of teenager to late teen, early 20s, folks that haven't figured out what their interests are yet necessarily. How do we give them things to do or offer things for them to do that can engage them without being so complex that they can't learn how to do it in a relatively short period of time?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Any other questions, Alicia?
No, this was great, Wormwood. I knew you'd be very interesting, and you were. Thank you so
You
much.
were, and here you were worried, and we almost killed an entire hour with awesomeness of Wormwood.
You ladies, your questions draw it out of me. What can I say?
Okay, so you have been watching Simply SCAdian, no title required. I am Zoph. My guest co-host this week was Jalicia, who I'm sure will be back again because she's so awesome.
Oh,
I mean, Lucas,
anytime.
I miss you. I do miss you, Lucas. I can't lie, but Jalicia is awesome. And we were talking with Tomas Wormwood from the East Kingdom. I don't know who we're going to be talking to in 2 weeks. It's going to be an adventure. I have a couple irons in the fire with people. Don't forget, on our Facebook page, we have a pinned form so you can recommend people that we should have to be as guests on Simply SCAdian, no title required. So please let us know. We're looking for people from all over the known world. We don't mind, well, I mean, we always do this at 8 o'clock on a Thursday night, but we'd still have to talk to somebody from Lockak. That would be so cool. Early in the morning for them, but we'd do it. All right, have a great time, great evening, everybody. And this is Simply SCAdian, no title required, signing off.